ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। So today we will be starting our discussion on the Bauddha philosophy. Bauddha means those who believe in the teachings of Lord Buddha, also known as Gautama Buddha or Siddhartha. So those who follow his teachings are known as Bauddhas. So we will try to have an idea of their philosophy, what they believe in, their concept of bondage, liberation, the world, etc. So all of us are more or less familiar with the important points of the life of Gautama Buddha. It has been written by so many authors in so many ways. So we are all familiar with that. We all know that he was born in a royal family in Kapilavastu. Kapilavastu is now that region is somewhere north of Bihar in India, and he was born in the 6th century BC. As we have seen that he was a contemporary of Mahavira, and we all know how Siddhartha because that was his name, he was a prince, a son of a king. So he renounced everything, all the pleasures, his kingdom, everything, and embraced monastic life. And we all know why he did so. The sight of the misery, he saw 4 sights. Those are of disease, old age, death, and finally of a monk. So these 4 sights impressed the young prince with the idea that the world was full of suffering, and the monastic life was the one. Monastic means the life of renunciation was the one which could possibly lead him to escape this suffering. Not only for himself, actually he embraced the life for all the others who are willing to benefit from his knowledge. He felt so intensely the suffering of everybody. So those sights and how he saw them, that is a very beautiful story. We can discuss it some other time. So the thing is, he renounced the world in search of a state which would be completely free from suffering forever. So he wanted to know the real source of suffering and the means to get rid of this suffering. So it is said that he went to many teachers, those who were at that time well known, many spiritual teachers and scholars, etc. And he tried to learn from them, but their teachings did not satisfy him. So then he thought that he would realize the truth for himself, and he had tremendous willpower. So he sat down, and we all know that finally, just before attaining illumination, he sat down with a great vow under the Bodhi tree. that ihasane shushyatu me shariram, etc., that let my body be dried up on this seat where I am sitting, but I will not get up till I have attained illumination. So that was the determination with which he sat the final time before attaining illumination. And previously he had practiced intense austerities. Then finally his efforts were crowned with success. He attained illumination and he became the Buddha. Buddha means literally one who has attained enlightenment. The enlightened is the Buddha. So the message of his enlightenment means his teachings laid the foundation of Buddhistic religion and philosophy. So now we know that it has spread far and wide. China, Tibet, Japan, Korea, Ceylon, Burma, so many countries. Of course, it is there all over the world, but these are the main countries. So, like our Sri Ramakrishna, Buddha also taught by conversation. He did not write anything. It is said that he taught by conversations and his teachings were recorded and handed down to his disciples. Means guru to shishya, like that, successive generations. Finally, they were put in writing. So, those writings are our source about Buddha's teachings. So, what are those writings chiefly? Those are the three Pitakas. Three means three, and Pitakas are baskets. So, three Pitakas are the three baskets of teachings. They claim to contain Buddha's actual teachings as reported by his close disciples. So, what are these Pitakas? The names are Vinaya Pitaka, Sutta Pitaka, and Abhidhamma Pitaka. So, the first one, the Vinaya Pitaka, deals chiefly with the rules of conduct. The Sutta Pitaka contains sermons or parables. And the last one, the Abhidhamma Pitaka, deals with problems of philosophy. So these are the main source of the teachings of Buddha, and they are all in Pali. But in course of time, his religion spread, and there were many schools were formed. The most well-known schools that we all know are the Hinayana and the Mahayana. Yana means vehicle on which we travel. So Hina means lower and Maha means higher. So Hinayana is, so to say, the lower vehicle, and Mahayana is the, so to say, higher vehicle. Mahayana came later. It was Hinayana because they changed the form of Buddhism, the later monks, and of the new sect they formed, they termed it as the greater one, and the original school they termed as the lower one. So the first one became Hinayana, and the later school, in which some compromises were made and some changes were made, that is called Mahayana. So Hinayana is actually supposed to be the more orthodox and faithful to the teachings of Buddha. This we should remember. So it is also called as Southern or Pali Buddhism. and it is also known as Theravada, which you must have heard about of this name. So Mahayana, the later development, flourished mostly in the north, in Tibet, China, and Japan, and it adopted Sanskrit for philosophical discussion. So that is why we find that a great amount of Buddhist literature is also in Sanskrit. Many terms, when we see, you will find that many terms are common with Sanskrit, they use the same word. Then this literature was translated into Tibetan and Chinese also. So naturally, in course of time, Buddhism became changed. And the later monks made some changes in the teachings, and these were varied and many. So the different schools of Buddhism which thus arose are so many, and the philosophical literature of Buddhism is so huge that even one lifetime is not sufficient to study everything. So following the pattern which we are following, we will stress upon the practical side of Buddha's teaching, those which can show us the way, which can help us to get rid of suffering, because that's what Buddha's aim was, you see. Problem is, with the passage of time, the followers often forget the original aim of their master, and they get diverted into so many paths, so much philosophy, so much metaphysics, wrangling over small details. This happens, this is bound to happen. You can't prevent that. But we should remember that this was the root, the main message of Buddha, of suffering and how to get rid of it. Because suffering is something which everybody has to experience. There is absolutely no exception. Sufferings are of various types, and no embodied being can be rid of them completely. It is absolutely impossible. So, how to get rid of this? When we understand that suffering is synonymous with embodiment, there is no escape, then we become eager to get rid of this. After, when we have matured sufficiently, when we have had enough of life's experiences, then this yearning comes. So it is a very high stage. So this was the primary teaching of Buddha. This we should remember, and we shall concentrate upon this, because Buddha was like our Sri Ram Krishna, Holy Mother, and all. He was primarily an ethical teacher and reformer. He was not a philosopher. Like in Sri Ram Krishna's Gospel, you do find some philosophy, but that was not his main aim, to either to become a philosopher or make his followers philosophers. That was not his aim. His aim, like Buddha, was to teach mankind how to get rid of this suffering and attain infinite bliss. And he showed the practical way. Buddha did the same thing. Buddha's teachings also point to all mankind, or rather humankind, the way of life which leads beyond suffering. And it is said that when anybody asked Buddha metaphysical questions means those which had no practical implication on our life, then Buddha avoided discussing them. He did not give much attention to those questions because he knew that those were questions for the sake of questions. That's all. They would not have any practical implication in our life. Sri Ramakrishna also, in the gospel, you must remember this incident that one person came and asked him about the Panchadashi and all, or rather Sri Ramakrishna asked someone, have you read the Panchadashi? So that person said that, no sir, whose name is that? Panchadashi, is a very advanced scholarly work on Advaita Vedanta. So when Sri Ramakrishna asked his disciple, have you read the Panchadashi? That disciple had not heard of that. So he said, no sir, whose name is that? So Sri Ramakrishna said, thank God you have not read it. It is good. People will read all those sorts of things and come and pester me with questions which are of no use. So Buddha also followed the same thing. He repeatedly pointed out that idle speculation should always be avoided because they don't take us nearer to our real goal. What is our real goal? Our real goal, according to Buddhism, is arhatship. Arhats are those who have reached illumination. So arhatship or arhathood or vimutti. Vimutti means in Pali, mukti in Sanskrit. So Pali they say vimutti. Same thing. In Sanskrit it is vimukti. So that is our real aim, the state of freedom from all suffering. Now problem is, if we indulge too much in these idle speculations, we will simply waste our time and we will entangle ourselves in the net of these words and we won't be able to get out. Same thing has been taught in Vedanta also. Don't think that Vedanta is an exception. Shankaracharya says in his Vivek Chudamani, Shabda Jalam Maha Aranyam. Aranyam is a forest. Shabda Jalam, the net of words. So if we get entangled in the net of words and we go about wandering in this infinite forest, we will never find our way out. So the most urgent problem is to end our misery. That is the main thing. So one who indulges too much in theoretical speculation will have no energy to do something practical. The beautiful example given by Buddha is a person was pierced by a poisonous arrow. Now, what did that person do? He began to do research. Who shot that arrow? From which direction it came? How deeply did it pierce him? Etc. etc. All the while the poison in that arrow was spreading in his body. We can't call that person intelligent. The first thing he should have done was take out that arrow. That was the prime necessity to save his life. So this example Buddha gives. So we shouldn't be like that. And instead of discussing metaphysical questions which have no bearing on practical life, we should direct our energies to put the teachings of Buddha into practice. So Buddha always tried to enlighten his disciples on the most important questions of sorrow or suffering, its origin, its cessation, and the path leading to its cessation. Because in his own words he said, this does profit. This does profit. This will be of real gain. It has to do with fundamentals of religion and leads to absence of passion, cessation, quiescence, knowledge, supreme wisdom and nirvana. This is I have quoted one of his teachings. So, the 4 questions, primary questions, the answers of which constitute the essence of Buddha's teachings. We will now deal with those 4 questions. Or rather, actually, those are not put in the form of questions, they are called the 4 noble truths propounded by Lord Buddha. This is called Chatvari Arya Satyani. Satya means truth. Chatvari is 4 truths. Arya means noble. A noble man was also called Arya. So Chatvari Arya Satyani, these are the 4 noble truths of Buddha's teachings. What are these? The first is life in the world is full of suffering. This is the first truth. Dukkha. Second, there is a cause of this suffering. It is not without cause. It does not drop from the skies. If suffering is there has to be a cause. Second truth is there is a cause of this suffering which is called Dukkha Samudaya. Third is, thankfully, it is possible to get rid of this suffering. Nirodha. Nirodha, we know, stopping. You must be all knowing the first sutra of Patanjali Yoga Sutra. Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, the stopping. So, Dukkha Nirodha, it is possible to have Dukkha Nirodha. The fourth is, there is a path which leads to the cessation of suffering. Dukkha Nirodha Marga. Dukkha Nirodha will not happen by itself. We have to travel along a road, and by traveling along that, we will reach a state when dukkha will cease to bother us. This is the main thing. It is not that dukkha will be completely removed from the world for all time to come. That can never happen. What we can do is rise above dukkha. That is the main thing. So if you want to rise above something, we will have to make effort. We will have to travel along that path which will give us the power to raise ourselves to such a level that suffering won't be able to touch us. So these are the 4 noble truths. The first is, as we have seen, that the world is full of suffering. So we all know how Buddha, when he was a very young man, he indulged in all sorts of pleasures and all, and his father would not let him get. An astrologer had told that his son, the astrologer had told Buddha's father that Buddha would either be a great all-conquering king or he would be a great monk. These 2 were the options. So the king, like all fathers, he was much attached to his son, so he never wanted Buddha to become a monk. So he kept Buddha in the palace. We all know he did not allow him to go, because outside when he went, Buddha will see suffering. The whole world is suffering. But he could not prevent Buddha from going out, and Buddha, when he went out, he saw disease, old age and death. So all these constituted suffering in Buddha's mind. But it was not only these 3. The enlightened mind of the Buddha grasped that the very essential condition of life, human and subhuman, it is not only human who suffer, all living beings suffer. So life is such that it is always intermixed with suffering. He saw this. So he wanted to be completely free from suffering in all forms and wanted to show mankind how to get rid of that. So Buddha saw that birth, old age, disease, death, sorrow, grief, despair, unsatisfied desires, everything is suffering. So all that is, in short, all that is born of attachment is suffering. And he found out that worldly pleasures, which we call happiness, those worldly pleasures appear to be pleasures only to short-sighted people. Those who can see only a few steps, they cannot see beyond. They only think the so-called pleasures of the world to be pleasures, but they are actually the source of misery. So these pleasures are transitory, they come and go, and when they go, we suffer. And even when they are with us, we fear that they may go one day, we may lose them. So all these actually make pleasurable things, so-called pleasurable things also, the source of suffering. So one when realizes this, then all the pleasures, so-called pleasures of the world, lose their charm and they turn into positive sources of fear and anxiety. We all generally, people, when a son is born, how they celebrate. In India, especially, in all countries, I think, people are very happy when they have children and all. But what was Buddha's reaction when the news was conveyed to him that a son was born to him? What was Buddha's reaction? He said, "Oh, a bondage has been added. A bondage has been added to my life." This was his reaction. Because in the so-called good news, Buddha saw that it was actually bound to be a source of suffering sooner or later. So this is the first truth, that the world is full of suffering. Until we are attached to this world, attachment means binding together. If we bind ourselves to suffering, we have to suffer. This is the simple truth. So this is the first truth. What is the second truth we have seen? If there is suffering, there has to be a cause. It cannot be without cause. Something must be causing this suffering. Now we come to a very important concept of Buddha's teachings we should remember, because later we will again deal with this principle. So the origin of suffering, the origin of all the evil in life is explained by Buddha in the light of his special conception of causation. We have seen that there is a cause of suffering. So it is explained by a conception of causation by Buddha, which is known as Pratitya Samutpada. This is a very important teaching according to Buddha himself. Pratitya Samutpada. What does it mean? It means that nothing is unconditional. The existence of everything depends on some conditions. Now, since everything must have a cause, there also must be something which, being there, our misery comes into existence. Misery also must have a cause. What is that? If we can eliminate that cause, we can get rid of this suffering. So this is the principle of Pratitya Samutpada, according to which nothing in the world is uncaused. So what is the chain of causation? This we have to understand. This is very important. The crux of the Buddha's teachings, we can say, how misery is caused. He shows step by step, one by one, what leads to misery. So let's see that. So according to Buddha, life's suffering, old age, death, despair, etc., there are too many. We all know, we have all experienced. So life suffering is there because there is birth. First one. If there was no birth, if we wouldn't have been born, being born means what? Being born, you should remember, being born means identifying ourselves with this body. This means being born. So if we had not been born at all, there would not have been suffering. Okay, this is the first thing. Now, birth also must have cause. Why are we born? Buddha says we are born because of the will to become. Will to become means the will to be born, to come into existence in this body. We wanted, and we have, because of our want, we have been born. So will to become, that is the cause of our being born. This is the force or the blind tendency or the predisposition to be born, which causes our birth. Okay. Now this cause also must have a cause. This tendency also must have a cause. What is the cause of our will to be born? That is our mental clinging or grasping to the objects of the world. Our desire to enjoy the objects of the world creates the will to be born. That will lets us come into an embodied state, and birth leads to suffering. So this clinging to objects is the cause of our being born. Now, what is this clinging due to? What is the source of this clinging? It is Trishna. Trishna or thirst. Trishna is a common word in Indian languages. Thirst for these objects of the world, craving to enjoy objects, sights, sounds, etc. This thirst is the cause of the desire to be born. But from where does Trishna originate? What is the cause of this Trishna? The cause is our previous experience of enjoyment. Our previous experience of enjoyment is all stored here in our mind. Everything is here. So we recall the pleasure we had experienced by enjoying the objects, and that pleasure, that memory of pleasure, induces us to search for that enjoyment again. So previous sense experience, which had been accompanied by pleasurable sensation, which is called Vedana, is the cause of our thirst or craving. But this sense experience also arises out of something. What is that? That is contact. Contact of the sense organs with their objects. If there was no contact between the sense organs and the objects, there would be no sensation at all. So this sparsha, or the contact of the sense objects with our sense organs, leads to sense experience. Now, this contact would not have arisen had there not been our indriyas. If we had no indriyas, how could we experience objects? So these indriyas are called the 6 organs of cognition by Buddha. Shad ayatana. Shad means 6. So if these were not there, we would not have come into contact with sense objects, then we would not have experienced pleasure. That feeling of pleasure would not have driven us to search for further enjoyment. That would not have, then it would not have led to the desire to be born, and we would not have been born. But these objects, these 6 organs of cognition, which enjoys objects, they also depend upon something. What do they depend upon? They depend upon the body-mind organism, which constitute the perceptible being of man. So this organism is the cause, but this organism could not develop in the mother's womb if it was devoid of consciousness. Consciousness means in Vedanta also, Jiva, which is individual soul, that actually enters the mother's womb. So it is conscious. That consciousness gains a body inside. So if there was no consciousness to enter the mother's womb, then there would have been no body. So the consciousness that descends into the mother's womb is also the effect of the impressions of our previous existence, the last state of our past lives. Those impressions contain in a concentrated manner all the impressions of our past deeds. So those impressions are the cause of our rebirth, and those impressions, they also must have a cause. So now we come to the primary cause, which is ignorance or avidya. This is the primary cause. Same as Vedanta, this whole cycle of which Buddha describes is simply put in Vedanta by 3 words, this chain, that is avidya, kama, karma. That's all. Avidya means ignorance, kama is desire, karma means our activities, all the selfish activities. Because of ignorance, we have desire. Because of desire, we perform selfish activities. Because of those activities, we are bound to this body, we become embodied, and we suffer. So, ignorance of the truth. Now, ignorance in Buddhism and ignorance in Vedanta, there is a shade of difference. In Vedanta, this ignorance is about our real nature. But in Buddhism, this ignorance is about the ignorance of the nature of worldly existence. According to Buddhism, if the transitory and painful nature of worldly existence was understood, if we would not have been in ignorance of that, then there would not arise in us any karma to enable rebirth. So ignorance therefore is the root cause of impressions or tendencies that cause rebirth. Okay, this is the thing. So ignorance has to be countered by gaining a true knowledge of life. So this is the chain. It is very complex chain, so we can just go through it once more. So in brief, there is suffering. Suffering is due to first birth. Birth is due to the will to be born. The will to be born arises from our mental clinging to objects of the world. This clinging is due to the thirst or desire for objects. This thirst is due to the sense experience which we have had. This sense experience is due to the contact of the organs with the objects. This contact is due to the six organs of cognition or indriyas which we have. These organs are due to our this is dependent upon the embryonic organism composed of the mind and body, and the mind and body could not develop because of some initial consciousness, and the cause of this initial consciousness is the impression of our past life, and the impressions are due to ignorance of truth. This is the thing. This is how ignorance leads to suffering step by step. These are the 12 links in the chain of causation called the Pratitya Samutpada, governed by the principle of Pratitya Samutpada. This is the Buddhists also call this the wheel of existence. Wheel. One leads to another, one leads to another. So it is a cycle. If we don't break this cycle, we will go on endlessly rotating with that wheel. So many of you must have seen that many Buddhist monks also, they turn these wheels. Day and night they turn these wheels. This is called the Bhava Chakra, the wheel of this world. So to remind themselves of this wheel of causation, that one by one it thus happens that ignorance leads to suffering. So as we know, Buddhism also believes in rebirth. So these 12 links can also be divided into 3 parts. One portion of the link is from our past life, the major portion is in our present life, and some portion will be carried into our future life. What portion is coming from our past life? Ignorance. We are carrying it from our past lives, and impressions we have carried from our past lives. Okay. Then in the present life, what happens? The initial consciousness of the embryo, the body and mind, the 6 organs of knowledge, then sense contact, the pleasurable sensation which we experience, the thirst for desired objects which we experience. This thirst causes clinging to sense objects. This clinging leads us to be born again. And this next birth, it leads to rebirth, which is called jati. Then old age, death again, again birth, again old age, death, like that. This is the chain of causation. So in this we have to understand one thing. This is a very important contribution made by Indian philosophers, that the conception that external phenomenon of life is due to an internal impetus of desire. This is the thing. Everything external which we experience is not by chance. The source is our internal desire. This is different from the Darwinian concept of the evolution. Darwinian believes that everything happens by a sort of accident, say. Like the first appearance, this evolution, the first appearance, suppose a horn on the cow's head, or the formation of something, any part, say eye, nose, ear, etc. They say that it is due to an accidental variation. But Indian philosophers believe that there must be an internal urge, and this internal urge is responsible for this outward this manifestation. So if we can stop this internal desire, we will cut this wheel into two. It will stop for us. So living body is not simply a collection of pieces of matter, but it is the outward manifestation of an internal urge or desire. If we can get rid of this, we will break this chain. So this is part, this cause of suffering we have seen. Now, the third noble truth about the cessation of suffering, it says that suffering can cease. It is not that we'll have to suffer through eternity, no. Cessation of suffering will follow from the truth that suffering also depends on some conditions. So what we have to do is remove these conditions and suffering will cease. So, but we have to understand clearly the exact nature of the state called cessation of suffering, what that state is like. That state, first of all, like Vedanta, Buddhism also believes that liberation is attainable here and now, in this life itself. One who has attained liberation in this life in Vedanta is called a Jivan Mukta, free while living. So Buddha also teaches that we don't have to wait till death. We can attain perfection here and now, when the perfect control of passions and constant meditation of truth, when these have been perfected, then we will gain perfect wisdom, which is called, we have seen in Jainism, that perfect wisdom, when we gain that, Kevala Jnana, that is synonymous with Mukti or Nirvana. So, this is the third truth, that cessation of suffering, it can be achieved. This state is called Nirvana in Buddhism. It is the extinction of passions and therefore also the extinction of misery. So the third truth is that attainment of this truth is possible here and now. The state of Jivan Mukti is possible, and this attainment of this state is not a state of inactivity. It is not that after attaining truth a person has to be inactive. On the other hand, we will see how the Buddha, he lived to a ripe old age and he was intensely active. He did so much traveling, preaching, etc., and he founded the Brotherhood, the Sangha. So, it is not that after attaining the truth we will die or we will become inactive. No, we will be more active. Like in all the saints, life of all the saints, Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Holy Mother, Tulsi Das, Mirabai, everybody we see that they were so intensely active even after attaining liberation. They tried their best to carry this teaching to everyone. So, liberation is not incompatible with activity. But what kind of activity? Then that the type of activity changes. Buddhism also says that there are two kinds of action. One is done under the influence of attachment, and the other is done out of pure love, unselfishly. So the work or the karma which is due to the influence of attachment, raga, dvesha, moha, so that will strengthen our desire. Since it strengthens our desire, it will sow the seeds of rebirth. But if we perform the second kind of action, done with perfect insight into the real nature of the universe and without attachment, then that karma will not produce rebirth. This is absolutely the same as Vedanta. So, this is the third truth, that cessation of suffering is possible and we can attain nirvana here and now. So, nirvana is a guarantee that all the conditions which lead to rebirth will be destroyed forever. Rebirth will never occur, and it also means that one who attains nirvana enjoys perfect peace as long as he lives in this world. But of course, this peace is not like the pleasures which we get from enjoyment of sense objects. This peace is much higher. The one who has attained nirvana, a person who has attained liberation, goes beyond all worldly pleasures and pain. That state is of serenity, equanimity, and perfect peace. It cannot be described in terms of ordinary experience because there is nothing to compare that with. We can never compare that state with any state we experience, ordinary people. Okay, so this is the thing, this is the concept, that this is the truth, that nirvana is possible here and now. And what is the fourth noble truth? Fourth noble truth is that there is a path to liberation. It lays down the marga or the path which Buddha says he himself followed and others can also follow to reach a state which is free from all misery. So this we all know, it is the eightfold path, and this we will have to leave for the next week or the next class. It will take some time. So I think we can end here today. We have seen in short Buddha's life, how his teachings were recorded orally first, then they were written down later. Buddha did not like speculation on metaphysical discussions which have no practical utility. And we have seen that the three Pitakas are the main source of Buddha's teachings. And we saw that there are two main schools of Buddhism, Hinayana and Mahayana. And last of all, we discussed the Chattvari Arya Satyani, Dukkha, Dukkha Samudaya, Dukkha Nirodha, and Dukkha Nirodha Marga. Life is full of suffering. Suffering depends on some conditions. It is a chain of 12 links. The present life is the effect of the past life and the cause of a future life. Suffering must cease if the cause of suffering is stopped, and it is possible to do it in this very life. There are two kinds of actions. One is the actions to enjoy pleasures of the world. Those are the selfish actions. They lead to bondage. And unselfish actions lead to liberation. And the last truth, which we'll discuss in detail later, lays down the path to reach the state free from suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. So we can stop here. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. So, like every time, if anybody has something to ask, we will start from the top. Abhijit Da, Tripathi ji.
Yeah, Maharaji, thank you very much. It was very informative. Namaskar to everybody.
Thank you.
I have got one question which bothers me a lot is that Buddhism is saying that we are coming because of our previous thinking, thoughts, because of the senses and all suffering. Does it say anything about the self-realization? Whereas Vedanta says you keep on coming, taking birth because you have to know what you are.
Yeah. Buddhism, in this it differs. Vedanta says that, as I told you during the talk, Vedanta says that our ignorance of our real nature,
Yes.
that is the root cause. So our real nature is the Atman, according to Vedanta. But Buddhism says our ignorance about the real nature of the world is what causes suffering. So there is no question of self-realization in Buddhism because they say there is no Atman at all. We will go into this. We will go into this later.
Yes. I think Swami Vivekananda said very clearly about that we lost Buddhism in India because they went beyond Upanishad. So that is why there are not many followers of Buddhism in India, whereas outside world, there are a lot of followers. Is that what you think, Swamiji, makes sense?
No, first of all, I am not qualified to comment on that. Swami Vivekananda was qualified, but the general notion is that Buddhism, since it did not accept the Vedic principles, Indians could not accept it as freely as outsiders did.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Okay.
The thing is, when you're saying the last time Mr. Bhattacharya asked about the Nimit and that question, does it correlate with this thing that we are becoming Nimit, like in the sense of that thing, but by doing so, we are going towards self-realization? Is that something connected, Swamiji thinks about?
No, we will go towards self-realization when we follow the path which is charted out by our spiritual teachers. So if we don't follow that path, then we can be nimitta or we can be anything. We will not be any closer to self-realization. It is as simple as that.
Yeah. Thank you, Swamiji. I was just saying that he asked why we should work. Why should, if the God has done everything for us? I think that is where I was thinking today's talk, what you were saying,
No.
maybe connect something little bit.
No, not at all, because there is no concept of predestination in Buddhism. Absolutely not. Buddha says that there is no predestination or anything like that. We are what we make ourselves by our karma. And Swami Vivekananda also says the same thing. Swamiji says, what is fate and who is fate? Who has seen fate? Fate is what we make of ourselves. We make our own fate. That is the true attitude to adopt, because till we actually realize that God is the doer, when with every breath we are experiencing that we are doing everything, if we say orally that God is doing, it has no meaning at all.
Thank you, Swami. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Next is Purvidi.
Purnam Maharaj was an excellent talk. I'm just concentrating on the next talk when we will hear the remove cause of suffering.
So you're already planning ahead. Okay.
Well, even Maharaj, there are a lot of things with the other steps. Lot of things. What brings to what brings to what. And so I just couldn't remember all of them, although I wrote them down.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, it's okay if I can't remember them. At least I could remember. If I could remember how to remove these cause of suffering.
And because you plan ahead and you plan ahead so well, that is why you are our treasurer. And I hope that in this department also you will plan ahead and plan very well. Okay, thank you. Okay, Nadi Babu. Thank you.
Excellent talk, beautiful talk, always.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you so much. Sumita Di.
Namaskar, Maharaj. Maharaj, thank you. It was such a beautiful explanation of the, 12 the points of the karmic wheel. I have always had problems with the links to the 12, especially the spot where, the consciousness and its entry into the embryonic stage for another body. Very well explained. But I'm still a little confused about the link to the existence of the soul. I think it doesn't accept it. And so, yes, this talk was very helpful. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Radha Di and Ashok Babu.
Yeah. You can go first. Swamiji, I really enjoyed that lecture. Particularly, Swami Vivekananda said that Lord Buddha was a rebel child of Hinduism. I think your explanation and connection.
See, rebel child means rebel means who does not accept the age-old traditions that we call a rebel. So the thing is, I think I can only guess. I think that Buddhism in those times, Buddhism decried. See, what happened was many of our Vedic practices. It may be. I don't know. I'm guessing. Maybe those Vedic practices had lost their original fervor. They, in the name of Vedic practices, many other things were going on. So Buddha decried them. Buddha did not accept these Vedic sacrifices and all, and he did not accept the Vedas. So in that way, he rebelled against those practices which were existing at that time. But there must have been a reason. Maybe it had become corrupt. Maybe people, in the name of following that sacrifices, they were indulging in unwanted, this hinsa or the violence, or it is difficult to say. So when the basic principles of something become corrupt, then the teacher arises and tries to remove that sort of corruption. Like when Buddhism became corrupt, then Shankaracharya arose. In the name of Buddhism, so many horrible rituals and all were going on, which Buddha never preached. So in that way, Shankaracharya may be said to have rebelled against those practices of Buddhism. But all these are conjectures, because we can only, by the study of history, we can only guess that this may have happened. So since the main cause was Buddha did not accept the Vedas. And one thing we should understand, that is very important. Buddha's teachings were recorded centuries after he passed away, not 1 or 2 days. So were they kept in their original form? Did Buddha really did not accept the Vedas? Did Buddha really said that there was not a soul? We don't know. And as we will see later on, a school of Buddhism which is called Shunyavada, The Shunyavada, our concept of Shunyavada is completely wrong. The original concept. Original concept is this: Shunyavada means nothing. It's absolutely annihilation. It is not that. So now what did Buddha actually say? We do not know actually. We have to rely upon what we have. And unfortunately, Buddha did not give metaphysical details. That is why it is become almost impossible to find out what did Buddha believed in a soul or not. Did Buddha actually believe in the Vedas or not? We don't know.
Thank you very much. Very nice.
Thank you. Radhadi.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm just very nervous. Just little I was say something. Yeah, I mean, Nibbana, peace, those are just wonderful. That is our goal. But my problem is how to have peace with my own. I know my own condition, what I am. How to have peace with it and go on doing what I am doing.
Yeah, peace, it is a simple thing. According to Buddha and all other religions, we suffer peacelessness. There is only one cause, and that is desires.
Yeah.
If we can get rid of desires, not all desires. Now you have to take care of Ashok Babu for us, so don't get rid of that desire.
Yeah.
And you have to bring some nice things for me when you come. You don't beat a red. But those desires which bring suffering as a result, we have to give up. That is the only thing. So you are the embodiment of divine love. There is no question of any such desire in you. That is why you are always in peace. That is what I see.
Thank you, Maharaj. Very nice.
Thank you so much.